ceremonies over the past couple of days. It's been a real treat. And like Jen said, my name is Jake, and I have 2 kids. I work for the LGBTQ Parenting Network in Toronto, in Canada. And we provide resources, advocacy, and education for LGBTQ parents. And what I'm working on specifically is a research project over the past year about the experiences of trans parents, about their experiences of discrimination, and also the strengths, their perceptions of their own parenting strengths, the strengths that they bring to parenting as they are trans, not in spite of that. That's one of the questions that we're asking. And I'm a trans man myself, so I was born female. I live my life as a man. And I will focus a little bit more on trans parenting in my 5 minutes, because that's what I'm working on, but there's a lot to be said about sort of the LGBTQ community in general in Canada. I'm going to start with a quote from my son Beto, who's 4 and a half. And this is a quote from a brief sermon that he delivered on gender in our backyard this spring. And he delivered this sermon while he was bouncing naked on a trampoline with a popsicle in one hand. So, like 4-year-olds do, you can picture it. So this is his quote. He said, "And yeah," he starts things with "and yeah. And yeah, because there's no such thing as boy things and girl things anyway. And some people are girls and they change into boys, and some people are boys and they change into girls, and some people are both boys and girls, and anyway, so yeah." So that is, of course, a more sophisticated understanding of gender possibilities than you would find in most university classrooms. And it's also more sophisticated than any of our, probably any of our government legal frameworks can accommodate. And I bring this up because I think it's an example of what we offer our kids when we are willing to show up in their lives as our authentic selves, when we're willing to sort of queer their world, so to speak. And I will come back to that later. So to look at Canadian successes around LGBTQ parenting, it's not really possible without acknowledging the work of Rachel Epstein, who's here in the front row today. And Rachel's work for the past 20 years in Canada has been really pivotal in a lot of the progress that we're seeing. And I would say the progress consists of 2 things: winning some really important legal battles, and equally important, if not more, sort of transforming our kids' worlds by building community. So a couple of victories to note are that in Canada we have same-sex marriage rights, and we have strong common law, which means that your right to parent is not tied to your parental status is not tied to your legal sex, it's not tied to the sex of your partner, and it's not tied to whether or not you're married. So for the most part, family courts are very friendly to gays and lesbians right now, and even to non-biological parents as well. They've won custody battles as well against biological parents. It's legally possible to adopt in Canada. Non-biological parents have the right to do second parent adoptions of their children. If sperm, with lesbian couples, if sperm is from an unknown donor, the non-biological parent has the right to be listed on the birth certificate from birth. A court recently recognized 3 parents as legal parents of a child, so 2 lesbians and the gay man who they parent with have been recognized. So we haven't really seen where that's going yet, but it's a very important ruling for sort of respecting family configurations. Years of doing workshops in fertility clinics, that's part of Rachel's work, has made it possible for LGBTQ people to use those services openly and not to have to plead in a letter to a doctor, as lesbians had to do years ago. And Rachel piloted a really important course 10 years ago called Dykes Planning Tykes. It was a course for lesbians wanting to parent. And that course is still running, and it spawned several more. So there's a course for gay men called Daddies and Papas to Be. And there's a course called just a sort of general queer and trans family planning course, and one for trans men who are considering pregnancy. And these courses have been really important, and actually there's a documentary that has just been finished about the Dykes Planning Tykes course, sort of a 10-year retrospective. And I think Rachel has some copies here today. So that's the progress, but there are, of course, limitations to that as well. Some of the legal victories don't apply across the whole country. They're specific to certain jurisdictions. Second parent adoption is still an extra cost, an extra step that some people find insulting and unnecessary. There is, because of the sort of configuration of our families, there are sometimes extra costs or specific policies that apply in fertility clinics. Federal laws is still making surrogacy very difficult. And trans people, I think, in particular, are an example of a group who may not benefit, may benefit from some of these gains that I talked about, but not benefit from all of them for sure. So our recent study with trans parents, we heard endless stories of trans people losing their children, either losing custody or losing access. sometimes temporarily and sometimes permanently as well. And I bring this up because, well, for one, I think it tells us we need to be working on the health and the wellness of the whole community, even if we're seeing advances for some groups, that we're looking at all of the groups. And I think number two, it tells us that we need to work on things in addition to legal battles, because what's happening right now is trans parents are losing their children despite a positive legal precedent. So the legal precedent in Canada says being trans should not be considered a factor in a custody decision. And yet we're seeing this happening. So when we get back to Toronto, we're actually hosting a think tank about family law and trans parents, and inviting lawyers and trying to sort of help us figure out how it is that this is happening. But it's clear that legal gains are an ingredient in the change we want to see, but they're not sort of the whole recipe. So looking at what daily life is like for Canadian LGBTQ parents, I think that was something we were asked to answer. I think it's an impossible question to answer because it depends on who you are and where you are. It depends on whether you are the L, the G, the E, or the T. It depends on how much money you make. It depends on rural versus urban, whether you're a racialized person, you're facing racism, etc. And I want to contrast my own experience as a trans parent with a trans woman who I know. And she's living at the same time in the same city, and we're having very different experiences. So she, the woman I'm thinking of, came to understand herself as a woman later in life after she had had seven children. And when she transitioned to female, she lost her job, her home, her wife, all of her friends, her extended family on both sides. And she lost access to 7 of her children. She lost all contact with them. And in the middle of the trial, this is sort of 2 years ago, in the middle of the trial, she was so devastated that when the court was on break, she attempted to commit suicide while the court was on break. And the court responded to her by charging her with contempt of court and administering a fine. Right? So the message is, you will be punished. Right? You will be punished for being who you are. And to contrast that with my own experience in the same time and place, both my children were brought into the world by queer midwives. My own doctor is trans. My mother's a lesbian. My son goes to a social justice-focused school where there's a lesbian vice principal, lesbian teachers. The newest teacher is a trans man. The school celebrates Pride. There's a week every year called Gender Splendor, where the school talks openly about gender roles, about homophobia and transphobia. And the most recent speaker at the school was a family who's been in the media recently because they've decided to not tell people the gender of their newborn child. I don't know if some people have heard about them on the news, but they've made quite a splash. And so I'm presenting my own experience because it's typical of Canada. I don't think it is, but it's an example of what's possible, just like it's the sort of punishment and the alienation that I described in my friend's life is also possible, despite the legal gains that we're seeing. So I'll finish up with just some current struggles that I think are going on. And briefly, I just want to say something about the US, even though I'm supposed to be speaking about Canada. In the US right now, I mentioned that in Canada being trans is not considered a factor in custody decisions. In the US, it very much is. So in the US right now, trans parents are losing custody left and right, and the decisions are quite open. It's because you are trans, so it's considered harmful to a child, right? So that's something that we need to be working on. There's 3 ways in the US to become a parent, and adoption, by marriage, by birth, and none of them are secure for trans parents. And I won't go into too much detail about that, but they're all, each one is sort of legally very insecure right now. In Canada, what we're working on is, for trans parents, is creating some visibility. So we're working on a documentary about trans parents, trying to put some positive images out there. I think one of our to work towards consistency in legal victory so that they apply to all families and that families are safe regardless of how much they resemble the norm. I think one of the struggles is to make our communities welcoming places, so there should be no scarcity of community. There is scarcity of time, money, all of the resources. These things are finite, but community and welcoming and belonging needs to be limitless. Right? So there needs to be no scarcity of that. I think, and we need to be, and like I say, I bring that up because I think we need to be able to have communities that are open enough to incorporate all the contradictions. So the contradictions that bisexual parents bring, the contradictions that trans parents bring to a gay and lesbian context. And I think our children will be the better for that. And I think that we have an opportunity here to sort of reframe the terms of the debate and sort of broaden the scope of what we're asking for. From gay rights to something that we could call, which are important of course, but towards something that we could call gender justice, that would protect the rights of gays and lesbians who challenge gender roles in who they love and who they desire. That would protect the rights of trans people, who we are, the way we express our gender, and would protect the rights of women because that's a struggle that's not over. And I think that together that's a very big group of people who have some real common interests in mind, right? Which is sort of sovereignty over who we are and how we present that to the world. I think I'm probably way over my time. I'm seeing some nodded. Okay, so to finish up, I think there's some key questions that we need to be continuing to grapple with, which is to what degree do we present ourselves as normal and as unthreatening? And to what degree do we insist on being sort of whole, complicated, fabulous people that we are? And to look at which families will never be considered normal, will never benefit if we rely on that image for our progress. To what extent do we normalize ourselves, and to what extent do we sort of try and queer the world around our families? And to what extent do we say that we are like other families, and to what extent do we say we are different, in fact, and it's not a deficit? And there are some benefits to that. Which brings me back to my sort of bouncing 4-year-old and his popsicle and his complicated ideas about gender. And I think that that's sort of for me, that's the answer to what we offer our kids, is we offer them the chance to be leaders. And they may say no thank you to that responsibility, and that's within their rights to say no thank you, but some of them will take it out and will be in really unique positions to sort of take on this fight in the future. And we'll probably hear about that at the team panel. That's all. Thank you.